This episode of Earl Grey is brought to you by Audible.com, offering more than 180,000 titles for smartphone, tablet, and desktop. To get a free audiobook of your choice and help Trek FM at the same time, visit audibletrial.com/trekfm. And also by Enterprise in Space, an international program of the nonprofit National Space Society. Find out how you can help science and education and become a virtual crew member aboard the NSS Enterprise Orbiter by visiting enterpriseinspace.org.
Hi, this is Klein Kusatsu. I play Admiral Nakamura on Star Trek Next Generation, and welcome you all to Trek FM.
Tea, Earl Grey, hot.
Welcome, listeners, to another cup of Earl Grey, Trek FM's dedicated podcast to the next generation. I am your host, Amy Nelson, and joined with me today is the jovial Joe Keegan and the jubilant Justin Oser. Joe, how are you today?
Good,
You haven't blown away, have you?
No, it feels like the Wizard of Oz because there's a storm here and it's really windy and really wet. So yeah, I'm just staying in and watching Star Trek all day. And I've been rewatching The West Wing, which is really good. So I'm enjoying that.
Oh, nice. I am in the very last season of The West Wing.
I'm still in season 1, so.
Oh, it's so good.
It's so good to rewatch something that you really enjoyed from years ago, so. Yes. That's fun.
And Justin, how are you?
Doing great. Yeah, as of this recording, we've seen episode 3 of Picard. I'm loving the show and talking about it on our podcast, The Line. So yeah, just feeling good and happy to be here and talking TNG.
Yes.
Always good to have Justin give us the update on Picard.
I mean, it's the thing that we're all talking about and watching, right? So I'm going to give you a weekly update while it's on.
Yes. All right. Well, we received an email. Justin, why don't you read that for us?
Yeah, so this is from Eric Bogan from Cleveland, Ohio. And he says, I really enjoyed your episode on badass data moments. 2 of my favorite badass data moments that you did not cover include the following. First, Data taking command of the Enterprise in Gambit while Riker and Picard are both stuck on board the space pirate ship. I love seeing Data in the captain's role because his command style derives much from experience seeing Riker and Picard command, but is uniquely his own. He commands very firmly but professionally. He and Worf were used to being co-department heads under Riker and Picard, but were thrust into the 2 completely different roles of captain and first officer. It was very badass that Data was able to effectively and professionally handle his conflict with Worf, despite the potential awkwardness of being the boss of someone he considers a friend, and had typically been more or less co-equal with in the command structure. And second, Data standing up for the exocomps and quality of life was also very badass. He literally put his career on the line because he believes so strongly in protecting the rights of artificial life the same way Picard did for him in Measure of Man. So thank you, Eric. Those are some really great moments. And I think it goes to show that Data has lots of badass moments because we didn't even pick those those moments or come close to it. So
yeah, there were a lot of people that were mentioning Gambit, and I was like, oh, yes, that's... Yeah. Why? We can't mention them all.
Yeah, exactly.
I suppose with the 3 of us and picking 3 badass moments, we can pick a maximum of 9 when there's probably hundreds. So
yeah,
it's difficult.
Exactly.
Yeah. All right. Well, we have some Babel Conference feedback, which came from Earl Grey 310 and our discussion on the most toys. This was great, listeners. We loved reading all of your comments. So Justin, why don't you start us off?
Yeah, so Carrie Purvis says, I love seeing the scenes filmed with David Rappaport. It's very sad that he passed away. He would have been brilliant in that role. So Carrie is referencing when we talked about the original actor, David Rappaport, who was supposed to have the role of Kivas Fajo. There were a couple of days of filming. Unfortunately, he attempted suicide after that, so they had to find another actor, Saul Rubinek, whose performance we talked about. And then David Rappaport, unfortunately, did end up committing suicide a few months after that. Now, I don't know if it was Carrie or someone else, but they pointed out on the Blu-ray, I think you can see some of those scenes that were filmed with David Rappaport. I haven't seen that yet, but definitely going to check it out.
JJ Becker says, top-notch discussion as usual. This is definitely up there among the best Data episodes, in my honest opinion, with plenty of Data badassery. Saul Rubinek, of course, is great in everything. Definitely give Warehouse 13 a watch if you haven't already. Thanks, JJ, for your comment. I agree with the Warehouse 13. I think it was me that suggested people go watch that. Saul is just an amazing actor, and he really brings the character of Kivas Faggio to life, I think.
Yeah, it was nice that we got to talk about Data's badass moments and then the most toys the next week. So definitely one of a great badass moment episode. And we have Jim Stoffel, who wrote, another great Earl Grey. I always enjoyed this episode, and I consider it to be a study in pacifism. Data is a pacifist, but if push came to shove, would he stay true to his beliefs or be more human and act out on his anger? Thanks, Amy, Justin, and Joe, for another good podcast. Well, thanks, Jim. We definitely do get to see his acts that will defy Kiva. So, yeah.
Yeah, that's a good point about, well, he says a study in pacifism. Of course, in the end, it seems like Data is ready to kill this guy. But yeah, we had a really great discussion. It's a pretty interesting episode for sure.
All right. Well, let's get to today's discussion. We are going to finish, I guess we could say, our Lost Episode series. This will be part 9. And it is our first Lost episode with Joe.
Yes, so I'm starting my discovery of Lost episodes right here.
Yes. So we invited Brian Meloche, who was able to send in some scripts and has some Lost episodes for us to share. Brian is host of Star Trek Discovery Podcast and the Star Trek Picard Cast. So, Brian, welcome back to Earl Grey.
Why, thank you, Amy, and thank you, Justin and Joe. It's a pleasure to be back. When I submitted a bunch of topics to you guys several months back, and I know that when you guys found out that I had, submitted to Next Gen, you were like, "Oh, we should really include that in your Lost Episode series." So, I wanted to tell the story and some of the, there's this one little juicy tidbit that I'm going to include, but
we're getting a scoop here on Earl Grey.
Yeah. So, I guess, most listeners, I think, would probably know that there was a policy that Michael Piller put in place to take fan submissions from, novice writers in many cases to, take their story ideas. And some of them even went to the point of like actually writing the episodes. Ronald D. Moore famously was one of those. I think Renee Echeverria was another one that came in that way. So I had heard about this policy, and I was like,
yeah, I'm curious, how did you hear about it?
It was a known thing. I think at the time I probably had the Star Trek magazine. That was part of the fan club, and so I think it was mentioned in there. But anyway, so I hadn't really given it serious thought, but I had. I'll fast forward a little bit to 91. So it was probably like March, or it was a dreary day in 1991, and I was kind of in between jobs. I had taken a job out of school. It wasn't so great, and taken another job out of school. It wasn't so great. I was just not a happy guy. And so where I got my happiness was watching Next Gen. And at the time on City TV in Toronto, it used to be on every day at around 4 o'clock, I think. So I would get in my daily Next Gen fix and keep going. And one day they were playing, at the time they were like replaying the old I'd say, first 3 seasons of Next Gen. So they got around to first season, and there were some clunkers, as we all know. Well, the the episode in question was Angel 1. And that one, it's probably not the worst episode of season 1, but it's just one that really makes my, like, the back of my neck hairs go up, because it's just so, like, Riker as a...
It's not a good episode.
It's not. And
I love the idea and concept of it.
I think the idea and concept are great, but the execution doesn't come off.
Well, that's kind of what happened. So I'm watching this thing, and after watching it, I said, that really wasn't a good episode. If I started thinking, if I had written that episode, I would have made this change and that change and this change, and that would have been a better episode. And I thought, I could really write a better episode than this. And then I asked myself a question that changed my life. I asked, well, why don't you? I was like, yeah, why don't I? I think I could do this. So fast forward a bit, I had been playing around with ideas, and I didn't really know what story to write, didn't know how to write, especially for...
So you didn't have like a writing background, or hadn't done much before?
No, not really, no. So I had, I had read a little bit about it, but I still hadn't really gotten anywhere on it. A year had passed, and during that year, I had moved back from Waterloo, where I went to school, to Windsor, Ontario, my hometown. And Creation was, at the time, they had their, didn't just have the one Star Trek con, they had like cons all over the U.S. and even abroad, I think. And so they had a convention at I think it was the Dearborn Civic Center in Michigan, and that is a particularly bad venue. And I had been there before, but this particular event, they had a seminar, which was a writing seminar. It was basically how to learn to write for Star Trek. And who was putting it on was the script coordinator, Lolita Fajo, was on there. Of course, you mentioned the most toys that Kivas Fajo was named after her.
I know that.
Yeah. So, but also putting on the seminar was 2 very famous writers and producers in Star Trek, Ronald D. Moore and Brennan Braga. So I got to spend the day. It was a pretty, small class of maybe 20 people.
That's pretty amazing.
Yeah. And I got to learn straight from them how to do it, like what kind of stories they would accept, and how the process went. And that really invigorated my interest in doing it. So I'd say right after that, I started working on it. And it took me a while. I was working a couple of jobs in there at the time. And so it wasn't an instantaneous process. I think it took me about like 8 months to write it. But I submitted the script, and it was called Manifest Destiny. And that story was, it was a ship from the future, the Enterprise N, comes to the Enterprise D, and much kind of like, sort of like yesterday's Enterprise, actually intervenes to stop something from happening that, if it happens, throws the Federation into complete chaos over time. And what the interesting part about this ship is it's partially Borgified. Like and this is, before in Voyager, we see the 29th century. So this ship's from the 29th century, and the crew is partially Borgified. What I mean by that is there's like heavily we see a lot of implants on them, extra devices, and they've got some kind of like networked mind, but it's not exactly like the Borg. Like there's still individuality. It's almost like what you end up eventually seeing in Descent, before Descent, and but actually being a part of the Federation and Starfleet. And so we find out, this captain whose name is 25 Melnick, and he ends up, kind of like in the middle of this change. He decides to abort the mission, and that ends up even making things worse. And long story short, there's a lot of interaction between Picard and Melnick, and it has to do with the first contact situation. Okay, so that first contact situation originally went completely utter chaos, and that's their original like ideas. They're going to come back and change time. So essentially the story ends with Picard changing his tactic with the captain of this other ship that they meet, which I can't even remember the name of the aliens, but I remember the captain was had a thing for weird names of characters. So this character's name was Neofnu Nifnik. Hello, I'm Neofnu Nifnik.
Nice. Wow. I give him a voice.
Yes. So it ends with them actually having a handshake, and that handshake somehow it means something slightly different to what a handshake means to us. But that handshake to them is kind of "we love you" kind of thing, sort of a different meaning. Whereas he bowed or he said something that out of context that was taken the wrong way. But anyway, that first contact is successful. The Enterprise N and Melnick and everything completely like disappears, and it just goes away, and you are led to believe that everything is good and that future never happened. So that's how it kind of ends. And so I submit it, and about 2 months pass. This was, I would say, in the summer of 93, or early, like May or late, I guess, late spring of 93 is when I submitted it. And in July, I got a letter back from Paramount and an envelope rejecting the story. And I got it back. And the interesting part about this is it wasn't read. Like, it clearly wasn't read. It was pristine as how I sent it in. So I'm like, well, what the heck? What happened? So I started, going through library books and stuff like that. Keep in mind, the internet was just like basically in a nascent stage at that time in 93. It was CompuServe was my big exposure to the internet. So it was harder to figure out like what the heck, to do. There was even difficult to find like software to write a script on, so because WordPerfect and that wasn't designed for that kind of thing. Microsoft Word was not even a thing. Well, it was, but I used
WordPerfect was the king there.
It was. So anyway, I had figured out that my problem was that even though I was close to the format of screenwriting, I didn't get the the font right. I had some brilliant idea to change the font. The margins weren't correct. There were a lot of things that I did that said it's not the right format. So, an obvious novice mistake. But I felt pretty strongly that the story itself was still good. But I realized that it was too long. So, like, after I made the formatting changes, it got it down to what seemed to be exactly like at that time. I think I had gone to another Star Trek convention and bought a script, and so I could like compare what I had to what was in the script, and so I made all these changes, and it was way too long. So I resubmitted the script after about 2 months of changes. So I shortened it. I increased the action in the story. I punched up the interactions between Picard and Melnick, and resubmitted the script after, like I say, it was essentially the same story, but the script itself was quite a bit different and a lot better, I thought. And I submitted it then, and the name of that script, I changed the name in case they went, oh, you've already submitted this. So, yeah. So this one was called Changing Times. Okay. And that, I think, got submitted around September of 93. So this was right as season 7 was starting.
Okay, so I just want to jump in real quick. At my school, I have students who are in digital media and video production and stuff. And one of my senior students is working on a script. And of course, he has, unfortunately, you didn't, as you mentioned, a lot of support and research can be done on the internet. And he was presenting it's called a senior capstone project to me. I was just so impressed. It looked like an actual script, and I was just so impressed. So I definitely can see, that you'd want to have that right, the formatting and the font and everything. Yeah. So I had a question for you. When you wrote Manifest Destiny and submitted it the first time, like what season were you hoping that it would fit into? You'd mentioned that Changing Times, it was going to be obviously a season 7. But were you thinking Manifest Destiny would be a season 6 episode or?
Yeah, well, like I started writing it in season 5 and, really got underway, after the seminar. It was in the middle of season 6 while I was writing it. So yeah, I was hoping that it would be either season 6 or season 7.
But the way that you wrote it and the way that things worked back then, they could probably slot that into any season, really. Yeah. Right?
Yeah. The way that I wrote it, it could have been for anything. And at the time when I wrote it again, Deep Space Nine hadn't started yet. So I didn't really factor that in at all. So anyway, getting back to Changing Times, so I submitted that and watched the season transpire, and eventually I got a response back, and it was rejected again, and no invitation to pitch or anything like that. It was just a rejection, and I thought, that's it. I blew it. So a little bit of time went on. I think it was maybe at the time, maybe 8 episodes had already aired for season 7. I started, watching. I was like, well, Gambit, that was okay, but it wasn't the greatest 2-parter. And
I think we feel differently here about Gambit. But
well, it's all right. I think I love that. I think I like it better now. But Dark Page, I wasn't really didn't really like that. I loved.
That's one of Amy's and our favorites. But
yeah, I loved Attached. Force of Nature, I thought was a terrible mistake.
Really?
Interface, I didn't like.
Force of Nature is amazing.
Joe loves Force of Nature.
Force of Nature.
Yep.
I didn't like the idea of warp speed limits. So, and neither did they, by the way.
I know they didn't really use it much later, but it was kind of up and down with what you liked and didn't like.
Yeah, exactly. So, and it ended like at the end of Sweeps was Parallels, which I thought was a really great episode. Well, anyway, so I didn't know what to do. I like, there's no way. How could my script get rejected when I'm seeing these other episodes that some of them are good, but some of them are definitely not nearly as good as mine. So I started thinking what to do. I figured out what to do. So basically I talked to a friend of mine, and my friend submitted a letter to the executive producer, Jerry Taylor. And it was like, I've been working with my friend Brian on his script, reading it and how good it was. And I thought it was like one of the best things I've ever read. And it got rejected. And then I've watched these like 11 episodes of, and I detail like the things that I liked, the things I didn't like. And
Wait, were you writing this letter or someone else you knew was writing it?
So let me finish. So what I said is like, this letter got submitted. I wrote this thing. I don't understand why you've rejected Brian's script. I think you should give it another chance. To Jerry Taylor, submitted by Edmund Reno, my friend. So in other words, I wrote a letter to Jerry Taylor.
Wow.
And I wrote it. That's the secret, that it was actually, I wrote it, but Ed Reno, hi Ed, I'm sure you're not listening, but he knows this. I submitted it with his name because I didn't want to be presumptuous, and I thought it would probably go better if it was someone else sending the letter and not me.
Sound less like sour grapes.
I know. Yeah. So a few weeks later, about 3 weeks later, Ed gets this letter from Paramount out of nowhere, right? And he didn't even tell him because I didn't think there would be any reason.
So you like used his address?
I did. Yes. Yeah, that's.
He's like, Brian, why am I getting this letter?
Yeah, he's like, what the hell? And I said, well, surprise. So this is what it said. It was Jerry Taylor herself, the showrunner of season 7, wrote back Ed, and she said, gee, I was really touched by your letter, and really appreciate the feedback. I decided to go back and look at the the writers or the researchers they write notes. Like every script that gets submitted, they have to take notes on it, to say what it was and their impressions and all that and what to do with it. And they said the whoever reviewed my script said it showed a lot of promise. It was really good. There were a couple things that weren't quite there, but it showed a lot of promise, yet they rejected me. And so she thought, well, I don't really understand why they rejected Brian, because normally for a writer, to submit something this good, we definitely want to have them in. So if you could send the message back, have him call Lolita Faggio, and I would like to get him to pitch to us, as soon as possible. So I get this call back from Ed. He's like, what the heck is this? And he told me though, and we knew, what it meant. It's like, I'm going to get my shot. So I call her up, and they're like, okay, well, when can you pitch? Or sorry, it wasn't even that. It was like, oh, when can you pitch? And it was going to be, I think, Tuesday. And
you have to travel to LA to do this, right?
No, you didn't have to. You could do it over the phone.
Oh, okay.
Yeah. So this was Tuesday. I was going to pitch on Tuesday, and this was the previous Thursday. So I basically had the weekend to come up with stories to pitch. I had nothing, right? But I'm creative. I come up with ideas. Even though I didn't have anything down, I knew things in my head. I could come up with stuff. So I was going to pitch, and I have to look back to make sure the exact date of this, but it was the date that I was going to pitch was the date of the LA earthquake. It got postponed.
January 17th, 1994. I remember because I was in Southern California at the time.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah. So it was going to be on that day, and they didn't come in, obviously. So I ended up delaying. It got delayed a couple of days, I think, and then that ended up getting postponed again. So it was. So I had a little bit of time to refine my ideas a little bit. So I came in finally about maybe 2 weeks later with 10 stories, and it was unheard of. They're like, 10, you have 10 stories. Wow. So I submitted a bunch of, I'm not going to go through all of them because take too long, but, the one that they were really interested in was, there were two. There was one that was, a Worf story that was basically Worf investigating a homicide on the Enterprise. And
that's totally interesting because you don't really see Worf doing investigations like that much.
Yeah. And so they were initially interested in that, but they said that there were some other Worf stories that were coming up, and sure enough, they had like short when it came back, there was like Homeward, I think, had just happened, and there were, I think, one or two other stories, but they didn't want to go that route. So Eye
of the Beholder is kind of a murder investigation thing.
Yeah,
where Worf has some.
Yeah, and so another one that. And I don't really remember too much of the specifics of it, but it was basically a life form interacts with the Enterprise. And they're like, oh, yeah, we're doing that in 2 weeks. So that was Emergence, I think.
Emergence, yeah.
Yeah, it was sort of similar, but the funkiness of that particular, it had the Brannon Braga seal of weirdness on it. So mine didn't have that, but that ended up not going too far. But the one that they actually were really interested in would have brought in a new species of like a new enemy to Star Trek, and it was it starts with this. So we see the Enterprise. It comes up to another Federation starship, like an Excelsior class starship, and it hails, and it's Riker on screen, and they make contact, usual, and then the next thing you know, he says, "Worf, fire all weapons," and they destroy the Excelsior ship, and the cold open ends with, "That's the first of many to fall." And we're like, what the heck is going on here? So the story introduces this new species with technological shape-shifting. So they can like take a ship and morph it into whatever they desire, and it's basically like a duplicate copy. It's almost sort of like what Odo could do, except this is like total molecular transfer of everything, like duplicate copies of everything, including people.
That actually comes up in
Enterprise,
one of the time
with the Romulan drone ship.
Yeah,
they can kind of holographically kind of make itself look like any ship.
Oh, for holographically, but there is actually one of the, maybe it's the first A Time 2 novel, which came out in 2003 or 4, where there is a species that does that. They just kind of like can sample a ship and just totally recreate it.
Yeah.
But, yeah.
Well, that's essentially what they did. So in that story, Picard, who was off ship at the time, he comes back to the Enterprise and discovers that Federation starships have it surrounded, basically wanting to know what's going on. And of course, that wasn't Riker. That was this other ship, and it's kind of like a whodunit and what's going on, and introduce sort of like how Q Who introduced the Borg. Mm-hmm. It was kind of like, this is a new threat that we need to be concerned with. Well, they really liked the idea, but they didn't buy it. But if it had been bought, it would have fit in the place of preemptive strike. So it was going to be, if they had bought my story, it was going to be the final story that they were going to buy for Next Gen. So anyway, Jerry was really impressed with what I had been able to do, for first time. And, she said that all of my stories were really good. It's just that, either they couldn't do it or they wouldn't do it, or it was a mandate not to do this kind of story, that kind of thing. But she said, look, I'm, going to be show running Voyager. When the time comes, and because we're working on that right now, I want you to pitch to Voyager, right away. So I was like, oh, wow. So, and when the Bible was, actually produced, I got the Bible, and, I got the thing that was going to be, what was her original name? Janeway. It was
Nicole Janeway.
Nicole Janeway.
Yeah.
So I saw all that, and then I saw how it changed. I got a new Bible, and with a new character, Catherine Janeway instead of Nicole Janeway. And anyway, so for that, I pitched twice to Voyager without ever seeing the show. Like, the show had not.
Just based on the show Bible, right?
Just based on the show Bible, yeah.
Wow.
And so I actually pitched twice, once to Jerry, once to Brandon Braga. Stories.
Now, is this still over the phone, or are you actually going to see it?
This is all over the phone.
Okay.
Yeah.
Wow.
Yeah. So this was would have been, I think the first time was August of '94, and then again.
And back then, for the show Bible, they just mailed it to you.
Yep.
I'm assuming. Yeah.
Yep.
Wow.
Yeah.
Wow, that's cool.
Yeah,
it's quite a thing to see in your mailbox, right?
Oh, I know. Yeah. Well, I think it was actually FedExed. It wasn't. Okay. It wasn't mailed. It was sent by FedEx.
You had a bit of the inside track.
Oh yeah. I did, and I started at the time. I was really thinking, okay, well, it was at the time I was still, I live in the U.S. now, but I was still living in Canada. And I'm kind of like, well, I really want to make a career out of this, but how am I going to do that? And can I even come to LA to do this? Don't I need, visa and all that stuff to do it? Oh. So it was around that time that the first two pitches to Voyager, there was nothing that they ended up buying. Although one of the stories was actually very close to one of the ones that it was one of those situations. Like I said, it happened to me twice. I pitched a Paris story, and they said, we're shooting that next week. I'm like, it was the one I think where he gets accused of murder or something.
Oh, that one. Yeah.
Yeah. So it was that. And in my story, I had an interesting twist of it. It was basically, he did kill the guy, but
really,
it was self-defense, but they didn't care that it was self-defense. What they cared about was they had weird laws on this planet, and all they ended up having to do was to say, yeah, I killed him. He was an a-hole. So
oh yeah, that's fine.
Yeah. So it's kind of like all they had to do was to justify that this guy was a jerk, and and in their laws, that was justification for it to be a just murder.
But by the way, the aired episode is ex post facto.
Thank you.
Yeah.
I'm still I'm doing a Voyager rewatch, but I've kind of postponed it right now, so I have to go back. The story that actually got bought was pitched the first time I pitched to Deep Space Nine. And what that story was called was Assistance. And it was, and you may recognize part of the story based on what I tell you. So Odo gets sick, and he can't maintain form. And the only way that he can be cured is to take him to the Founders to be cured. So that part of that story was combined with a story that was pitched by George Brozak, and that became Broken Link, which was the 4th season finale for Deep Space Nine. Mm-hmm. And that was pitched in December of 1994. And that's so like in that year of 94, I pitched twice to Next Gen because the shape-shifting story was actually pitched on we really want to hear more about this story kind of pitch. Can you pitch tomorrow? kind of thing. I didn't mention that. So I pitched twice to Next Gen, twice to Voyager, and once to Deep Space Nine in 1994. So
I have a question about that, because you said you pitched that in December of 94, but I see the episode came out in June of 96. So
yes.
They had to hold on to it for a while?
15 months of, wow. It wasn't actually accepted until March of 96. Finally, in March of 96. And they kept, I pitched to Deep Space Nine a couple of times in the interim, and they kept saying, yeah, we're interested, but we can't use it yet, so we can't buy it. And it had taken so long that I'm like, well, I don't know if I can depend on this to make a living. So I ended up deciding I need a fallback position. So I went back to school and learned computer graphics, and that ended up becoming my career, because that led me to web development, and then web development led me to what I'm doing now. So,
oh wow, yeah.
So anyway, but that was the one they finally accepted it 15 months later, and I got a check for, and I didn't get to write the story or anything. It was just basically they bought the premise. I got a check and a letter, check for $500, and a nice letter that I was able to, put on the wall. And, but like I said, by that time I just was like, I need to find something else to do. So, but over the next couple of years, I kept, trying to submit stories, and it got harder and harder. With Deep Space Nine and Voyager being on at the same time, 52 episodes a year, it was continuing to be a moving target that you had to submit to. And I was finding by 99 was the last time I pitched to Voyager. And I was really, I'd say the last 2 or 3 times that I pitched, I was just having more and more difficulty trying to find stories to submit. And the time in 99, I had my father had taken ill, and he eventually passed away from the illness. But at that time, I just had to kind of give it up and not pursue it anymore. But yeah. So,
but Brian, what an experience. And also it's like a snapshot of a certain time in Star Trek's history where they had that open submission policy, which even at the time was very unusual. But I don't know if we'll ever have that again, because we have shows on that are more serialized, and you can't really have someone just from the outside pitch something and try to slot it in, right?
Exactly. I think those days are over, at least for Star Trek. Like, unless they bring back a show that's episodic in nature, maybe. But even then, I don't think that we're ever going to see this kind of thing. The only thing I could see is if they had some kind of submission policy, say for short treks or something like that.
Oh, that would be interesting.
Or if they commission fan-based shows and they, start doing that way. I don't know, but
I think you need somebody who champions it as well, because Michael Piller really championed that. And I think it was partly because, like, going into season 3, there had been all this turmoil, and he was like, we need scripts, so let's just open things up and get people to submit stuff. And that was really helpful. But he was pushing for it, and I think the executives didn't really want to do that, but they were like, all right, I guess so, if that's what you feel you need to finish this season. So
I think it was an unusual strategy, which turned out to be a great one, because, like I say, there were a number of writers that ended up building their entire careers from that. And so
but wow, what a great experience. I have to say, Amy or Joe, do you have questions you want to ask Brian? Because I know, like, it's been a really fascinating story, but, like, there were so many facets to it.
I know.
It took a while to tell.
I know.
I was just going to ask you, the $500 you got, it seems like a lot of money to me for pitching an idea. Does it, in terms of the length of time it took you to come up with the idea and kind of think it out and kind of write it down and then pitch it, is $500 worth it, do you think?
Well, I don't think you can just base it on like a dollar per hour kind of thing.
Yeah.
I mean, it was an experience, and it was just something I loved doing. And I mean, I have one major regret in my life. And that is that, considering the exposure that I had to Star Trek back then, what I should have done was investigate what I needed to do to get a visa or whatever and move to LA and try to get in on on one of the shows, like as a intern or as just anything, anything to work on the show, because I had that kind of access to them. Like, literally, I could call them up and they would set me up to pitch. It wasn't like I only had like certain times. It's like, literally, they told me if I had any ideas that I thought were something that they wanted, they gave me the access. So
right.
My regret is that I didn't just take a chance and move out there, even for a couple of months. That's the one thing I know, that if I'd done that, my life would be completely different right now. I think, like, I still have this belief that I think if I had, I might be working on Picard right now, or the Orville, or probably not the Orville, or Discovery or something. I think that I have that ability, but I just haven't. I think at this time it's not like I think I could, meet Kurtzman and at some Comic-Con or something, and come on and pitch to us. That would never happen. The boat has set sail and left the harbor, but I just wonder, if I had, could I have done it? I think I could have, but I just, at the time, I couldn't even find like a school, and there were, I think, schools. There wasn't enough information to figure out, like, where could I go to school to learn how to do this? And were there any opportunities in Canada? It turned out, yes, there were, but I just didn't know them at the time, so.
Much harder to find information about stuff like that back then when you had to go to the library or whatever.
It really was. And, I even went to, vocational counseling at, like, the Department of I can't remember the name of it, but the Ministry of Employment or whatever it's called in Ontario, and they had me take a bunch of tests, and it turned out like my number one aptitude was to be a film director.
Oh, wow.
You know, so and number two was a screenwriter. It's like, okay. And then number three was what I do now, which is web development. So, or programming is what it said at the time. But
it's always interesting to take those tests and your aptitude tests. And it's like, I think I took one and it did say that I would be a good teacher. And
the funny thing is, like the course that I took at Seneca College was a course where you learned like multimedia production, media production, editing, computer animation. And there was this one little HTML course that that's what I ended up doing. So,
wow.
But yeah.
So what were the names of that species? The Neofnu Nifnik? What was that again? Because I'm intrigued by them.
Everything was an N. That I remember. I think it was like Neoceans or something like that. And yeah, I don't even have the files that are available. The other thing I would say is like everything that I had from that period it was all in a box, and that box we had a leak at our house in Cleveland in 2010 and got severe damage, and all of that stuff, all the paper stuff, even the computer discs,
floppy disks,
mold damaged.
Oh dear.
Yeah, so I had to unfortunately throw everything out, and
Oh, wow.
It was terrible, but yeah.
But yeah, that experience you had, I mean, that's just, maybe it could have turned into something more, but you got to actually submit things and see, a story premise that you had actually air. I think that's pretty cool.
Yeah, and it was really interesting because like I wasn't involved in Broken Link at all. So when I was watching it as a regular viewer, but also with the knowledge that, hey, my story is in here. And like the character that, kind of was trying to be set up with Odo for that wasn't in my story. Okay, wow. But there was a thing where he was trying to find some smugglers and loses his form while doing that. And that was part of Broken Link. So
cool.
Yeah.
But I have to know, when Broken Link aired, I mean, or did you ever get to see that with your friend Ed, who you wrote that letter under his name?
I did. I did. And we were friends for a long time, and he thought, at first he was kind of like, what'd you do that for? Like, put my name on her. But once he realized, what I'd done and why I'd done it, and he also like he was involved with, he read everything, and so it wasn't like this is a complete surprise to him. But
it was nothing nefarious. You didn't try and steal his identity or anything. You were just using his name for good, I suppose.
Yeah.
I think it was a very clever way to get in and get more information.
Yeah, because I didn't think that. Like, I thought if I just submitted it as myself and wrote it as myself, that Jerry would read it and go,
they would just toss it out, right?
Yeah, exactly. But I thought that if it came from a viewer that had read it and could see it in relation to the shows that had, or the episodes that had been shown already, that it would kind of be taken a little more seriously. And it turned out
clearly.
I don't know. I never fessed up to that until like.
I'm sure if you had met Jerry Taylor later and told her the story, she'd probably just laugh about it.
Oh, I'm sure she would. But I pitched to Jerry I think 3 times. The 2 times on Next Gen, and then at least 1 time on Voyager, maybe twice. I think just the 1 time. And yeah, I never told her then. So
at least you didn't get your mum to write in, though. Mum, they didn't like my script. Could you write them a strongly worded letter?
Hi, this is Brian's mom.
Yeah.
No.
So, how dare you reject my son? Yeah.
Yeah, it was very interesting though. I mean, that was, I'd say one of the things that I learned from that was that anything's possible if you put your mind to it, and you know, you just have to a lot of it's like they say, you know, it's like 1% inspiration and 99% perspiration. Like it really is. The important thing is to not just have the idea, but to do something with it. And I think that, you know, and I find myself failing sometimes with this, is I'll get this great idea and I don't do anything with it, you know. And the times where I've had success in my life, and I would consider this largely a success, you know, in many ways, I think I consider this like my claim to fame for many years. It was like the one thing that I did better than, you know, anything I'd ever done. You just have to take the chance and to do it. And if you don't do it, like, it's like one of those things, if you don't try, you won't get an episode made. So, right. You know, but if you do try, maybe you will. But it wasn't easy. Like it was difficult. And especially back then to, you know, really not, there wasn't a school I could go to. There wasn't a website I could learn this stuff. There wasn't software I could use to make the scripts. It was a long process. And that first, when I looked at that first script and I realized that it hadn't even been touched, like, you could tell it was pristine. And when I compared that to the second one was all messed up. Like it was clear that it had been read very closely. There were no like notes in there, but you could see where certain things were read and certain things were folded over, and it was curly on the ends. And that you could tell the difference. And but yeah, I wouldn't take the I wouldn't take the opportunity or the chance away. That was like one thing I'm really proud of, that I did it. Even if I didn't get anywhere with, like, if I had been not given a chance to pitch, I still would have said, you know, look, at least you tried, you know? Yeah. So. Exactly. Yeah. Absolutely. But, you know, all things considered, I think I got pretty far with it. I just didn't, you know, I just didn't get to make a career out of it.
Well, Brian, this has been very interesting to hear about the process of submitting and the stories and the many episodes and ideas that you have. And I think you left us with a very inspirational, you can do it note there. That's great. I mean, yeah, you have that inspiration and then you need to do the work to make it happen. So, well, thank you. Brian, where can listeners find you online? They want to check out your podcasts and interact with you.
Well, talkthroughmedia.com is where the podcast network that I started along with Ruthie Rink, my co-host on the Star Trek Discovery podcast and the Star Trek Picard cast that are going now. And Mark Kirkman, who is my host on The Walking Dead Talk Through and Fear the Walking Dead Talk Through, and Kyle, who does a lot of McAdams, who does a lot of behind the scenes stuff with us, but is also one of the co-hosts of Fear the Walking Dead Talk Through. We started up talkthroughmedia.com, and I'm kind of like the guy in charge of it, but it's all 4 of us. And so you can find us there. We're on Apple Podcasts and Google Podcasts and all of that stuff. In terms of Twitter, we have 2 different Twitter handles. It's Star Trek TTM for all things Star Trek, and the Picard podcast has its own Twitter. It's PicardCast. And we also have a Facebook group that's at facebook.com/group/Star Trek TTM podcasts, plural. So you can find us there. My Twitter personal handle is Brian J. Meloche. That's Meloche. I always tell people that my name, Meloche, wear galoshes. So that's how you remember me. And
you are also in the Babel conference, so listeners can talk with you there.
I am very active on the Babel conference. You'll usually Christopher Littlefield has my feedback for the Edge and the Line each week. I contribute to that, and yes, you'll find me on there. I'm fairly active on there, so thank you guys for having me today.
Thank you very much.
Yeah, thanks for being here. It's great to hear all about it.
Yes, thank you for taking the time to talk with us.
My pleasure.
Well, next week, Justin, what are we going to be talking about? Because
well, Amy, you're away next week, right?
So tell me, along with the listeners, what you guys are going to be talking about.
Yeah. So next week, we're going to have back Jen Tift of the Snap Trek podcast. So Amy, you and I talked with Jen about one of her favorite characters, Keiko.
Yes, that was such a good episode. I'm sorry to miss her.
Yeah, but me and Joe will be talking to Jen, and we'll be talking about a very relevant topic, AI and TNG. So I think that's going to be a lot of fun. There's certain episodes and characters and things we'll look at. So I think that'll be great, right?
I'm excited, yes.
Yeah, for sure.
Well, it's been so much fun talking to Brian Meloche about his lost episode of TNG today. But it isn't the only thing we've been talking about here on the network. Here is what you might have missed elsewhere on Trek FM.
Previously on Trek.fm. To the journey!
If I were writing Voyager right now, like reconceiving it, I would make each season like a different decade, like show the progression of time over 70 years.
See, we could have just done that with Kes as a character, though. I know I said it probably a million times in the last 5 episodes. Kes could have shown us what that would have been within the 7-year period. So, we all know my opinions on Kes and how much I liked the character.
Earl Grey.
Okay, Amy, your 8th pick.
What is that number?
Amy to the nth power pick.
I imagine it at the square root of -1.
-1, yeah.
Okay. Yeah,
Literary Treks.
There's all this backstory as you're starting to learn in the show about what happened between Nemesis and the Picard show. And so there was all this backstory. You couldn't really show it all in the show. You don't want to. The show's about what's going on in the present time of the show. But, Star Trek, since its origin, has always had ancillary materials that flesh out these stories. And we knew that would be the case here.
The Line, a Star Trek Picard podcast.
99% of the time, Star Trek tech makes sense. This does not to me.
Okay, Christy, Star Trek has asked me to believe some pretty ludicrous things. This takes the cake.
Okay.
I think so.
All right, we're on the same page.
This is completely...
More than going warp 10 turns you into lizard?
More than lizard babies.
Really?
More than Spot turning into a baby lizard. This, I'm just like, what are you trying to feed me here?
That's interesting, because I believe this a lot more than those other things. But.
Yeah. Brandon Baga's evolution theories are much more believable than this.
No, they're really not. But yeah.
And that's what else is happening on Trek.fm.
Check out all these shows and join the conversation about your favourite corner of the Star Trek universe and beyond. You'll find us wherever you get your podcasts. If you're an Apple user, be sure to hit the subscribe button on Apple Podcasts on iPhone, iPad, Apple TV, or the desktop Apple Podcasts app to get the latest episodes as soon as they are published. And please leave us a star rating and written review that helps others to find the show.
Okay, guys, very quick bonus question. It will require a short answer.
Okay.
So, if back in the 90s you were looking to submit an episode to Star Trek, would you have wanted to do it for Next Generation, Deep Space Nine, or Voyager? I think I know your answer, Amy, but I'll ask you anyway.
Yeah, that would be Next Gen, and it would be with Deanna Troi, and it would be a Troi episode. But I would like it for her to be later season, and with her in command of an away mission or some kind of mission to really show her chops there.
That would be awesome. Joe?
TNG, yeah, definitely, because that was I think I knew about the script submission thing, but I was really young. I wasn't in high school yet, because I got the Star Trek magazine. I think it was a UK version of it, and I was aware of it. I thought that'd be really cool. So yeah, definitely TNG. What about you, Justin?
Yeah, it's an interesting question for me because, I mean, unlike you guys, I wasn't watching TNG when it aired, or Deep Space Nine really when it aired, but I did catch a season of Voyager. So I don't know. I if that was really something that I was doing because I was watching Voyager, maybe it would have been Voyager, and maybe it would have been like, I always thought the character of Chakotay was pretty underutilized. I think it would be interesting to write something that really like delves more into his character and who he is, and he has to deal with a really difficult situation.
Nice.
So something a little different.
Cool.
All right. Well, if you're not an Apple user, we've got you covered as well. You can find our shows on Google Podcasts, Stitcher, TuneIn, Spreaker, SoundCloud, YouTube, and most third-party apps. And you can stream and download the MP3 file from our website or grab the RSS link.
We'd love to hear your thoughts on today's show, and there are many ways for you to do that. The best place to join the larger conversation is the Babel Conference, our listeners group on Facebook. Just type Babel, B-A-B-E-L, into the search field on Facebook and it should come right up.
If you'd like to send us an email, you can use the form on our website at trek.fm/contact. Choose to send to a show and select Earl Grey. That will come right to us, and we might read your email on the show. You can also find the network on Twitter and Instagram at TrekFM and on Facebook at facebook.com/TrekFM. So, Joe, where can people contact you when you're not having your mom write you letter of recommendations?
Well, do you know what? My mum would do that for me because she loves me very much. Yes. Yeah. But when I'm not doing that, you can get me on the Babel Conference. You can tweet me on the Twitter at JoeyJoe77UK. And like 5 people have done this week, you can email me, joepodcast@gmail.com.
Awesome.
Yeah.
What? That is so
5
exciting.
emails. Yes. I got emails from a whole bunch of people.
Oh, we knew you'd come
My
through,
mum
listeners.
didn't send me any. Just to throw that out there. So I got emails from Shoaib Mirza. Erin McDonald emailed me to say thanks for having her on last week. Colin Murray, Casey Pettit, and Jason Myers all emailed me.
Oh,
nice.
such great listeners we have.
I'm feeling the love completely. So thanks, guys. And I have replied to them all. So, and Justin, where can people contact you when you're not stalking Star Trek script submission folk?
Well, since I don't have an open policy now, there's probably not much use for me to do that. But when I'm not thinking about that and maybe dreaming of submitting something in the 90s, you can find me elsewhere on the network co-hosting The Line. That's our dedicated Star Trek Picard podcast with my friends Chrissy DeClercq-Zalagi and Brandon Shea Matala. We're having a great time talking about every Picard episode as it airs. And you can find me on Twitter. I'm at TrekFan4747, where I tweet about nothing but Star Trek. And you can find me hanging around the Babel Conference on Facebook. So, Amy, where can people contact you when you're not writing a story about Troy and Command in your head all day long for months at a time until you can convince someone to allow it to be part of Picard, maybe?
Maybe.
It's unlikely,
yes.
but...
Well, when I'm not having my mind occupied with that, you can find me over on UFP Earth, where I co-host All Good Things. And we are currently talking about Picard, but eventually all of Star Trek, so I'm looking forward to that. You can find me on Twitter at Miss Amy Nelson, and of course, you can find me right there in the Babel Conference.
If you'd like to help us keep all our shows coming to you each week, you can become a patron of the network on Patreon. Visit patreon.com/TrekFM. That's patreon.com/TrekFM to get all the details. Perks include early access to episodes, exclusive content, producer credits and more, available through our special patrons website, Patron Zone. It requires a great deal of money to produce, host and distribute these shows each month. We really appreciate any support you can give us and hope you'll join the team. Again, you'll find all the details at patreon.com/TrekFM.
We'd like to take this opportunity and recognize our current associate producers, Norman Lau, Michael Hueter, Thomas Appel, Chris Tribuzio, Jim McMahon, Joe Keegan, and Justin Oser. Thank you for supporting Trek FM and especially Earl Grey. So join us next time for another cup of Earl Grey.
It is by will alone I set my mind in motion. It is by the juice of Safu that thoughts acquire speed, the lips acquire stains, the stains become a warning. It is by will alone I set my mind in motion.
Submitting your script to Star Trek and having your story premise bought and pitching to Star Trek producers and writers is only impossible until it's not.
Great joy and gratitude.